For 13 days in October 1962, the world watched as humanity teetered on the edge of annihilation. A Russian buildup of nuclear missiles on the island of Cuba had the potential to completely change the balance of power in the Cold War and possibly end all human life. The Cuban Missile Crisis has become one of the most infamous moments in modern history. But what actually happened? And what would have been the consequences if the situation had escalated into a nuclear war? It's me, and you're watching this channel. Join me today as we look at what really went down during those 13 days in October 1962 that nearly ended the world. In the early days of the Cold War, the U.S. and Soviet Union engaged in a tense standoff over control of Western and Eastern Europe. Each side supported opposing factions in an effort to prevent either from falling under the influence of the other. In 1948, the Soviets began supplying weapons and ammunition to East Germany to strengthen its defenses against the West. This prompted the U.S. to do the same for West Germany. In response, the Soviets implemented a blockade of West Berlin in an attempt to starve out the Western Allies. However, it failed when the United States and its allies organized the Berlin Airlift to supply the city with food and fuel. This event is widely considered to be the first major crisis of the Cold War. It showed that both sides were willing to use military force to achieve their goals and set the stage for decades of hostility. In the following years, the U.S. and USSR became increasingly involved in proxy wars around the globe, such as in Korea and Vietnam, further increasing tensions between them. As the Cold War continued, the arms race between the two superpowers intensified. Both sides amassed massive stockpiles of nuclear weapons, which made any potential conflict even more dangerous than before. In the early 1960s, the U.S. and USSR began exploring the possibility of mutually assured destruction. This strategy involved each side having enough nuclear weapons to destroy the other even after being attacked first. This was seen as a way to deter the other side from starting a war, since it meant that there would be no real winner. The idea was that the destruction would be so complete that neither side would want to risk it. On April 1961, a U.S. spy plane photographed a new Soviet installation on the island of Cuba, just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. The Americans soon realized that the Soviets were building a military base there and feared that they may also install nuclear missiles capable of reaching the United States. On July 1962, a U.S. reconnaissance plane took photos of medium-range ballistic missiles in Cuba. After developing the photos, it was clear that the Soviets had deployed nuclear missiles on the island capable of reaching Washington, D.C. within minutes. By now, President John F. Kennedy's administration was aware of the situation, but kept it secret from the public as they didn't want to cause panic. At the same time, the Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev was feeling threatened by American missiles in Turkey and Italy, which could reach Moscow in just 10 minutes. So he decided to place missiles in Cuba as a warning to the U.S. He hoped that this would deter the Americans from attacking Cuba or launching another invasion like the Bay of Pigs. However, the U.S. saw this as a direct threat and began making plans to respond. On October 16, 1962, President Kennedy announced to the American people that the Soviets had placed missiles in Cuba capable of reaching many parts of the United States. He stated that this was a direct threat to national security and that all options were on the table in terms of how to respond. This announcement shocked the nation and the world. For many, it confirmed their worst fears about the growing tensions of the Cold War. For others, it was a wake-up call to the very real possibility of nuclear war. Whatever the reaction, there was no denying that the world was on edge as everyone waited to see how the situation would unfold. President Kennedy met with his top advisors to discuss the best course of action. They considered several options, including a naval blockade of Cuba, a full-scale invasion of the island, or a surgical airstrike to destroy the missile sites. Ultimately, they decided on a combination of these approaches. On October 22, 1962, the United States began a naval blockade of Cuba. This was done to prevent the Soviets from sending any more missiles or related equipment to the island. At the same time, American U-2 spy planes began flying daily missions over Cuba to monitor the situation. They would take photos of the missile sites and relay the information back to the U.S. military. This allowed the U.S. to keep track of the progress of the missile buildup and also served as a warning to the Soviets that they were being watched. On October 27th, 3 days after the blockade began, an American U-2 spy plane was reportedly hit by a surface-to-air missile over Cuba. While the pilot managed to eject safely, the incident marked the first time a U.S. aircraft had been shot down over Cuba, and it raised tensions between the two superpowers. The U.S. saw this as a direct provocation by the Soviets, and it appeared that things were beginning to spiral out of control. As the standoff continued, President Kennedy prepared for a possible invasion of Cuba. On October 24th, he approved the deployment of 1,500 troops to the southern tip of Florida in preparation for a ground assault. Additionally, the U.S. Navy moved 6 of its Polaris submarine skippers to undisclosed locations in the Caribbean for covert insertion. These submarines were equipped with nuclear-tipped missiles, which could be fired at targets in Cuba without the need for aircraft. All of this was done secretly, so as not to tip off the Soviets until the last minute. On October 27th, the world got a glimpse of the immense pressure facing President Kennedy. A televised meeting between him and his brother, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, revealed the intense strain on his mental health. During the conversation, the president could be seen pacing and gesticulating wildly as he discussed the situation with his brother. It was clear that Kennedy was feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders and that he was desperate for a solution. The following day, October 28, 1962, an American U-2 spy plane captured images of Soviet technicians working on a medium-range ballistic missile site in Cuba. This development was concerning because it suggested that the Soviets were actively working to make the missiles operational. If that happened, then the U.S. would need to take swift and decisive action. The thought of nuclear missiles being so close to American soil was alarming, and the pressure mounted on President Kennedy to take action. By October 29th, the situation had reached a fever pitch, and the world was on edge as it became apparent that the standoff may soon come to a head. With tensions high and the fate of the world hanging in the balance, everyone was wondering what would happen next. But then something unexpected occurred. On October 28th, Nikita Khrushchev sent a letter to President Kennedy proposing a deal. The Soviet leader offered to remove the missiles from Cuba in exchange for a promise from the U.S. not to invade the island. Additionally, Khrushchev suggested that the U.S. secretly return the Jupiter missiles it had placed in Turkey, which would help to reduce tensions between the two nations. After receiving the letter, President Kennedy's team met to discuss the proposal. They recognized that it could potentially end the crisis without further conflict. However, they also knew that if the deal fell through, the Soviets could easily back out and the missiles would remain in Cuba. Ultimately, they decided to accept Khrushchev's offer. On October 29th, President Kennedy announced to the American people that the Soviets had agreed to remove the missiles from Cuba. He stated that this was a positive development and that the U.S. would honor its part of the bargain by removing the missiles from Turkey. Over the next few weeks, the world watched as Soviet ships carrying the missiles left Cuba and headed back to Russia. Once they were gone, American inspectors flew over the island to confirm that all traces of the missile sites had been removed. With the crisis averted, President Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev were praised around the world for their leadership during the standoff. Many believe that their willingness to compromise and seek a peaceful resolution was key to ending the crisis. In the aftermath of the Cuban Missile Crisis, the world entered a period of relative calm known as the period of détente. During this time, the U.S. and USSR worked to improve their relationship and reduce the number of nuclear weapons in existence. This ultimately led to the signing of several important treaties which helped to prevent future conflicts. Despite this, It's important to remember that the Cuban Missile Crisis could have easily escalated into a full-blown nuclear war. Had either side taken a more aggressive stance, the consequences would have been devastating. Fortunately, cooler heads prevailed, and the world was able to avoid mutually assured destruction. The Cuban Missile Crisis serves as a reminder of the importance of diplomacy and the need for all nations to work towards peaceful resolutions to conflict. It's a testament to the bravery of those who worked tirelessly behind the scenes to bring about a positive outcome. What do you think? How do you think the Cuban Missile Crisis could have changed the world? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And on that ends yet another edition of our channel. It's been my privilege to share this journey through time with you. If you enjoyed this video, please show your support. Your support motivates us to keep bringing you top-notch historical content. So stay tuned for more thrilling tales from the past. Thanks for watching.